Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife. And we're going to talk about Project Arrow, a new era in Canadian automotive. My name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you will join us in fostering a positive environment here today that is a safe and welcoming space for all. We know that there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. So a special thank you to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and November's sponsor, our friends at Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have a tech-related question, please comment in the chat section, and a rep from our team will be back to you right away. If you have a question for the panelists today, please put them in the chat function as well, and I'll look at those and try and incorporate that into our discussion. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce today's guests, Tony Lamantia and Flavio Volpe. Start with Flavio. Flavio is an internationally recognized champion of Canada's automotive industry. He proudly leads the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, affectionately known as the APMA, Canada's national association representing original equipment suppliers to the worldwide automotive industry. When the global COVID-19 pandemic created a dangerous and serious medical equipment shortage in Canada in early 2020, he launched one of the biggest peacetime mobilizations of the country's industrial capacity in its history. Dubbed a manufacturing hero by the Toronto Star for his leadership, this effort resulted in the largest build orders of ventilators, face shields, surgical masks, and gowns in Canada's history. Flavio speaks regularly on behalf of the industry, industry interests, and is a sought-after voice by leading global publications, including The Economist, The New York Times, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, CNN, BBC, CNBC, and on and on and on. He was recognized as a top industry leader in 2017, 18, 19, and 20 editions of the Automotive News Canada All-Stars. Previous to APME, he served as the managing director for Canada of Wearsall AG, the EU's largest privately held solar photovoltaic energy developer, and also as the chief of staff to Ontario Minister of Economic Development and Trade. He holds an MBA from the Schulich School at York and a BA in International Relations from the University of Toronto. I would be remiss if I didn't say he's a very well-known baseball coach for his son, and he is a prolific Instagrammer, which I follow with some regularity. With that, I'll leave him to describe if he wants to. And I should also note in that whole exercise, he forgot to mention that he is a past guest on Business to Business on City News 570, powered by Cowen Insurance. Moving on to my good friend, Tony Lamantia. He is, of course, the president and CEO of the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation, a University of Waterloo alum. Tony has ties to the community for decades before helping to found Waterloo EDC as the organization's inaugural leader in 2016. A community builder at heart, he relishes the opportunity to work with businesses, civic leaders, governments, and organizations like our Chamber of Commerce and the tech ecosystem anchors to help build a strong, sustainable economy for the people of Waterloo Region. Tony is the past chair of the Business Economic Support Team of Waterloo Region, a partnership created to advocate on behalf of the local business community during the COVID-19 crisis, and he is currently a member of its leadership team. A passionate leader, His career has spanned the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors with executive roles in investment marketing, technology, sales, and mining, as well as the province of Ontario, where he was an assistant deputy minister of investment and industry. He is also a prolific tweeter and is very sharp, smart, and cheeky with his Twitter account. Also, I should just point out that not for nothing, he is a stickler for grammar in both English and Italian, and I'm neither proficient in either one of them. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Listen, great to have you both with us today. Appreciate you making the time. This is an important topic as we dig into Project Arrow. Just before we do the first couple of minutes, I just wanted to maybe get a little sense of how you've worked together, because this is not just me picking two random people, two folks that have worked together over a number of years. Maybe Tony, just give us a quick overview of the relationship, and because it paid off. Relationships pay off, and I guess that's the theme of this. Relationships pay off when there's crisis, and it certainly did in this case.
Yeah, happy to do that. I'm not sure if there's a celestial magic going on here, but Flavio and I have been great collaborators over the years. I met Flavio 12 years ago. I was an assistant deputy minister back from about 12 years in the private sector, and Flavio was the chief of staff to Ontario's Minister of Economic Development. So we started working together in the spring of 2009, around the time when we started to feel pretty sure that the world wasn't going to end after the global financial crisis. There were a lot of challenges, in particular with the automotive sector and restructuring. And we mobilized and started selling Ontario to the world with some really notable success. So that's how we met, over the years. Literally about a year after Flavio became the president of the APMA and took it in a very clear and productive new direction, I started as the inaugural CEO of Waterloo EDC. We worked together on our first Autotech symposium. You might remember that, Flavio, with Ray Tanguay when he was still with Toyota. Charlie Miller, the hacker who was able to disable the Jeep remotely, right? He was our keynote, so we collaborated on that. And fast forward to today and Project Arrow. It's a concept car moonshot that we want to bring to life, and so it's been I consider Flavio a friend, and I've been watching his career with a great admiration and support. So that's kind of my take. Flavio, I don't know what yours is, but that's it from the Lamantia side.
Oh boy! First of all, you're not that funny, but you look funny, and so that's what makes it entertaining. Tony, you're absolutely right. Tony is a friend of mine. We did not meet under those circumstances. We met in that tension between a ministry that is the target for investment participation requests, and I was in the minister's office. Usually that tension is the political side wants to do something and the ministry warns them you're doing the wrong things. Tony's nickname was the sheriff. It was the sheriff. Did you know that, Tony? We called you the sheriff. But Tony and I almost immediately recognized that, look, the world's not going to fall apart. And so the province does not have infinite funds. So let's do some of these things the right way. And what he didn't talk about is that we worked together on landing Fiat in Chatham for a full production plant. Nobody knew that was on the table. We kind of worked our magic with, I'm being nice to us, whatever it is that we called it. We figured out that that's what was really at play. And had they not bailed out Chrysler at the time, that would have been the first project we did together. What I learned there was from Tony, of course, is that if you expand your scope a little bit, to think about bigger ideas than what's on the table, what should be your minimum, but then pick one or two and then focus on them, you can do some pretty great things. And I still think, Tony, that if we had landed that one, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this, but that set the tone. But working with the sheriff, we did a lot of big projects over the years, and they never got to a decision point with the minister without being absolute winners. And I remembered that, and I went to go do something, and you went to go do something else, and we ended up here. And that Autotech symposium was one of those germinating moments that said, we could all do a better job of selling the Canadian automotive sector and the things that we do outside of this country. We know what we do in the KW. Outside of the KW and in the auto parts business, we talk about banging metal and melting plastic. Great jobs, great industry. But if we're going to do EVs, we're going to go on an 800 volt platform. That means we're going to do connected autonomous vehicles. And I think that places like the KW are going to be the center of the automotive universe, with players that you would never have thought of, like the Perimeter Institute, playing a role in defining what Canada's future is. And so I'm happy to be on today. I'm happy to be on with my good friend Tony. Our hairline has changed. It's been nicer to you than it has to me over the last 12 years, maybe because you already had a head start. But I think that what we'll do together on Project Arrow may grow some back.
Listen, I'm proud of this. I know you are. The what you've just described there is the intersection of business and government in doing big things. Your father was a longtime MP in Toronto. My dad was an MP here for a long time in Kitchener-Waterloo. I think we both worked in and out of government and kind of see how that works. Tony certainly does, having been in the private sector. And I think what you described, that facilitation role, is a big chunk of what Tony has done here since 2016, is bring the whole region together, saying when something happens for the benefit of Waterloo region, or for one part of Waterloo region, it's good for the whole of Waterloo region. And I think that's, as we get into Project Arrow, what's good for the province of Ontario, or for certain parts of province of Ontario, will be good for the whole province. So, but before, and then we'll come to that in just a minute, just quickly though, and I think this is important, maybe give a bit of context of, it seems like forever ago on one hand, but it also was like 15 seconds ago that the universe came to a complete crashing halt in March of 2020. And in those early days, Tony, when you constituted Best Waterloo here so we could coordinate our efforts, we couldn't find masks, let alone respirators, let alone ventilators in the province of Ontario for our healthcare sector. Talk a little bit about the effort, because Tony, you were a leader in encouraging this part of the world to do what we could, and certainly Flavio was. And maybe I'll start with you, Tony, and then have Flavio weigh in as well.
Yeah, I think both Flavio and I would consider ourselves, like, we use a lot of sports analogies. We played a lot of sports. I'm a little more chronologically mature. I would say that, that was a time where you couldn't really be a spectator. Even though a lot of people were spectators, it was like, what could we actually do? And it just made sense that with all of the uncertainty and with the challenge we had with the PPE shortages in Canada, that the community needed to mobilize to build up manufacturing. And we went from essentially not a lot of capacity, almost 0 to 90 companies in a number of months. But that, as well as setting up the business and economic support team, just seemed like a natural thing to do. And it ended up actually being better for the bottom line. I think I told you, I went from telling my board in May, not going to hit our numbers, and the board saying, don't worry about it. Keep, we trust what you're doing the right thing, to breaking a record, actually doing better than the year before. But I think it pales in comparison with the mobilization at the industry level and what Flavio was able to do with his platform, but also with his members. So I'm actually going to zip it and allow Flavio to spend a couple of minutes and talk about that, because that's quite a notable deployment that, hopefully decades from now we'll look back with some pride and fond recollection. Flavio, over to you.
Tony, what am I going to say on this one? Let's say that it was probably the most fulfilling thing I've ever been a part of. We have a crisis. It's unprecedented. It's going to affect all of us. If you remember the early days, we all thought we were going to die. And the only thing that was missing that we needed were things. So coincidentally, I represent companies that make things. So we just kind of asked the question of both levels of government, second weekend of March last year, how many things do you need? Do you have the specs? Maybe we can help you. And I thought I was on a flyer, to be honest. But I threw it at our members And within, I would say, a few days, we had 16 who said, okay, sure, tell us how we can help. And I think we were onto something. And all I really did was take the platform that we have and amplified that sentiment and invited people to join us. And so, the rest is history. We did what we needed to do.
But give some examples, like some companies that would have been in auto that started doing we have Clips Automation here, Tony, as an example, but Woodbridge and other companies that were nothing to do with, suddenly they're making textiles, or they're doing or ventilators, they're doing medical grade things which were needed. That's like a complete, like not even in the same area code of what their business was.
Yeah. So Woodbridge, who makes foam for seats and headliners, was making masks. Pat Plastics, who make HVAC, plastic HVAC, worked with Harvard Medical to do test swabs. Mitchell Plastics, local to you guys, Joe Daniel, they decided right away. They said, give us the spec. We got a spec, an open spec that was given to us by Ford, and they made 400,000 face shields without a contract, and just started sending them out to hospitals. I thought that was amazing. One of my favorite stories, not even automotive, although I'm trying to convince them to be an automotive, is Jeremy Hedges and Canadian Shield.
Yeah.
And they were in educational software.
Yeah, EdTech.
Yeah.
And decided that they had a responsibility as citizens to step up. I think aggregated a bunch of capacity in 3D printing, and then started making masks, and then convinced the federal government that they could do that. They were organized enough and committed enough and could meet the kind of deadlines for a real mass order. And then all of a sudden they built the Canadian Shield. And for me, if I wanted to pick my favorite story of citizenship during a crisis, I would pick Jeremy and his team out there. And they couldn't be further from in the business. Never mind all the auto suppliers that came into it. Couldn't have been further from the business. I think we learned enough from Jeremy and that team that he could hustle there. That not to scoop our own story here, but Jeremy should be involved. Jeremy and Canadian Shield are going to be in the arrow.
Let's get him there. That makes sense.
Yeah, Jeremy, if you're watching.
Well, we'll get this to him and let him know he's put on the team. So it is a good place to pivot to Project Arrow. It's the what's next. It's Tony's always has called it ever since I heard about this as the moonshot. So maybe Flavio, start with give us the Project Arrow 101. What is it? Why is it important? And then Tony, I think the other part is we play a big role in the auto sector here in Waterloo region. What's the role that Waterloo region can play? So maybe Flavio, talk about the project as a whole, and then Tony, where we can be with innovators, entrepreneurs, with that technology expertise here, what the role Waterloo region can play. Flavio.
We'd said to people many years, Tony talked about how we pivoted the APMA. All we really did was we said, we represent parts makers. Why don't we put them out in front? And why don't we put their product out in front? And why don't we update the definition of what parts makers are? It isn't just the analog parts that you see, but kind of the systems, hard and soft systems, complex assemblies. And for years, we had demonstration projects where we bought Lexus RXs. No, they were provided to us by Toyota Canada, who's been a partner from the beginning, to put other companies' technology on them as a rolling platform. We take them to auto shows around the world, specific to OEMs. Like, we take a Toyota car to a GM Auto Tech show to demonstrate technology on there. After right before the pandemic, but just after we renegotiated the NAFTA, the Prime Minister invited me to be his guest at the throne speech in December 2019. During that throne speech, the Governor General read his speech that said, let's go for a net zero economy by 2050, and then challenged all the major industries to show what you could do before that. Came back to the office and I said, look, we've been demonstrating technology on other people's platforms for years, but I have this big poster up in our boardroom that says, we make everything that goes into a vehicle here in Ontario I said, well, why don't we make our own car? And, we laughed and laughed, and somebody pulled out, this is a true story, cheese and grapes and wine. And we laughed through the afternoon. Could we make a car? And Colin Dillon was not on this, who's our CTO. Our eyes met, and it was, no, let's do that. Let's actually do that. And it turned into, okay, who would we bring into it? What would we call it? Where would we demonstrate it? Where the hell would we get the money? And then, we remembered that at some point in our history, we had this incredible technological demonstration about what Canadians can do with a clean sheet. And, the Avro Aero, to go back to your original reference to our Indigenous origins, the Avro Aero and its Iroquois engine were a testament to, hey, by the way, this is a Canadian project. Let's be very Canadian about this. Let's go right back to origins and do a tribute. The spirit of the fact that could we fly higher and could we fly faster than anybody else has done before? That project, that specific project, ended up with an ignoble end. But you can thank the Cold War politics of the late 50s for that. The technology went on, and the engineers went on to put the Americans in space and on the moon, and amongst other things, engineer and power the Concorde across the Atlantic. So we launched the Aero. We launched it in January of 2020 at CES in Las Vegas. We got some good, polite coverage, but I also had a bunch of people saying it's going to cost too much, which they're probably right on that one. And you're not going to get enough people interested. And I was worried for the longest time. We ran a design competition that was exclusive to Canadian post-secondary students, not the schools, although we hoped for support from the schools, but student-led design. We had 25 submissions, 9 shortlist finalists, 3 of them, one from Humber, one from Carleton, and one from the Wilson School of Design in BC, that we thought all 3 of them we could build one. We picked this one, an esteemed group led by people like Ray Tanguay, who I think we all know here, but also Ralph Giles, who's the global head of design for FCA. Great story. A kid who grew up in born in Haiti, grew up in Montreal, went on to become the head of design for FCA, and his first hit is the product we built in Brampton. I thought, great Canadian tie. We showed it in October last year. We opened an RFP. We thought we were going to have 120 companies. I hope for 200. 438 is the current number. And so we're building this car. We went and hired the chief engineer of special projects at Aston Martin. We recruited him. He's working for us full time. If any of you are watching the Bond film and you see the DB5 there at the beginning of the film, that's really actually a BMW E46 built by Fraser Dunn, who's now leading the engineering on the Aero. Partnered with Ontario Tech University, big partner. Partnered with Windsor Essex Development, VR Cave. All these companies between Oshawa and Windsor we are still on schedule. A year from now, you'll see a physical car, and we're going to tour the world with it.
What's the value proposition? Meaning, so it's using all Ontario-made parts from the parts manufacturer. But what else is the what's the other value add, or what's the value proposition?
It's national. It's national.
Yeah.
It's Canadian.
Yeah,
okay.
So it's Canadian, mostly Ontario, because of course most of the industry is here, but we've got great representation from 5 other provinces on it, led by Quebec. It is parts and systems throughout the car. We'll have a virtual reality experience too, where you imagine you're Iron Man picking apart the holograms to look at all the pieces. Feature the capabilities, the engineering efficiencies and strengths of Canadian companies, what's possible, where resources come from, what's the infrastructure look like, but also what we're doing, we're building into production specs. So this book at some point is going to be worth something, because this is my notes throughout. And what we've said to people is, we hope to spawn a startup cluster here. in Canada, either OEM startup cluster or the major systems. And the homework is available to everybody because we're cutting no corners. Maybe somebody like Tony Lamantia will take it over the edge, and maybe you'll be able to buy the second Arrow. Certainly, that's open, but the first one will be kind of an open source homework piece for us to demonstrate that we can do it here, and then to tell people like you, Ian, that we should do it here.
So Tony, then the Waterloo, it sounds like all the component parts are right here in Waterloo region. If you look at what was just described, technology, innovators, systems, hardware, software, that's what we have here in Waterloo region. What's your take on why this is so important for our economy, the Ontario economy, and then of course as a national project for Canada as a global leader?
Excellent question. Well, let me start with the world belongs to those who transform industry and create new technology platforms and own the intellectual property, right? That's really important. When I think about our auto tech cluster, we're blessed. It's rich. We've going from automotive manufacturing, not just Toyota, but its key suppliers, advanced driver assistance systems, connected vehicle technology, the Myovisions of the world, the Carnegies, the Jeros, additive manufacturing, security with script and QNX, BlackBerry, the commercialization hubs, Wattcar, Catalyst, partnering with the APMA. And even, we have some players in driver health and monitoring. I mean, the components are here. So I think there's a lot of companies involved, not just in auto tech, but also robotics and AI ecosystem that are kind of in Arrow's wheelhouse, and some playing at the margins. And so I remember having a great conversation with Colin Dillon, who's a terrific guy. He actually was one of our keynote speakers at the 2017 Auto Tech conference, and he wasn't yet working with the APMA, but Flavio's got a keen nose for talent. And I had a recent conversation with him about the whole vehicle as a caregiver concept, and I know we have a number of companies in medtech and driver health and monitoring. So just picture this. Ian McLean, you're driving to the golf course, and you get a phone call, and this is in a future car with this technology. You get a phone call from Greg DeRocher, and he starts busting your chops as he always does. And the car notices that your heart rate is suddenly higher, your blood pressure's going up, your temperature's going up, and suddenly this car decides it's going to cool the cabin, maybe start giving you a lumbar massage, calm down, Ian, calm down. Or, starts playing some classical or soothing music. I don't know what you like. Maybe it's heavy metal. I'm not sure. But I mean, that's the kind of the value proposition of just one part of the technology. And when you think about the promise of Project Arrow, it's really a one of those, we called it a moonshot, but it's an inspired challenge to all Canadians to transform industry and create the new technology platform, own the IP, and basically connect all of our capabilities and drive towards commercial success. So that's I mean, I don't know about you, but if you like high mountains to climb, that's a great one to embark on, right?
Well, and I think this is kind of the next piece. It's where as a natural resource-based country and manufacturers and exporters to the world, we've got to be conscious of climate and the importance of that moonshot, that net zero world that is, frankly, whether anyone likes it or not, it's coming. It's going to have to come, and industry should be leading that. And I think this starts to demonstrate that that's possible with innovation and those new advancements you're talking about. Because no longer are we hewers of wood and drawers of water. We have to be, what's that advanced manufacturing? That's our value proposition here in Waterloo region, is how do we put the technology and the advanced pieces into manufacturing? So the connector here, I would think, Flavio, is the broader effort for Canada to transform the auto sector, and it's moving this way. You see this from manufacturer to manufacturer to manufacturer, that everyone's moving to at least hybrid, if not full electric vehicle. That's one of those things that's going to happen. So Canada in EV production is critically important to maintain our industrial base and all the things that you're talking about. I think this serves the purpose of saying we can do the technology part because we've got the innovators, the technology, we have the people that can produce the parts or the stuff. That broader effort for EV production, because it's a globally competitive environment now. Everyone wants it because it's a new industry. How does Project Arrow tie into that, or why does it tie into that?
You know, every country in the world, every major market in the world is beyond suggesting starting to legislate and regulate zero emission vehicle markets, quantums. They're saying, all of them, the US, the UK, Europe, China, Japan, South Korea, Canada, that by the 2030s, you can't buy a car, you can't sell a car in that market that has any emissions. So as we start that ramp from 2 or 3% of the market to 100, in 15 years, it's really 2 automotive generations. The next automotive generation is being engineered right now. Those programs will be assigned in 2025 and 2026 and 2027, you know, where you decide to build the cars. Project Arrow is saying to those OEMs, saying to those countries, all those component parts are here, including all the raw materials and natural resources required for big energy density plays in batteries and cells. And so if you're going to draw lithium from the ground and turn them into cells in Quebec, you can pack them in Ontario and put them into cars and send them back down. You know, we talk EVs today to distinguish them from internal combustion engine vehicles. I think our children's children will not ever use the term EV after we get to that 100% mandate. It'll just be a car. You know, Project Arrow challenges people to think beyond electrification. It's going to happen. If I don't demonstrate to you that a whole bunch of that componentry is here, then I'm not doing the bare minimum of my job. Where the moonshot is the second part. You probably all came to work in a internal combustion engine vehicle. You've got a 12-volt battery that turns on a system that runs an alternator that's maybe 40 volts. That 40 volts powers the electronics that we all have in our cars right now. In a 100 kilowatt batteried electric vehicle, you've got an 800 volt system. An 800 volt system allows all those things that Tony's talking about. Connected autonomous vehicle as a caregiver posture. It is where the real opportunity is. We will always be great in manufacturing. We're always continuously improving. We have this great mix in this province, at least, of 3 major American automakers. Although I'll challenge you to define what Stellantis is in the future. Is there's a European influence, an American influence, somewhere in between, and then of course we've got great Japanese influence. We'll always continuously improve how we make cars. What do we do with that 800 volts? Jacqueline Waddy at Perimeter Institute invited a bunch of us down one day, and I brought a bunch of those hewers of wood and drawers of water into the space of theoretical physics. And one of her guests there, a visiting fellow, said, do you understand the concept of quantum imaging, where I can project to you an opaque image? And she walked us through it. And she said, zero emissions is table stakes. You're going to get to zero collisions because 800 volts is going to allow vehicles, people, infrastructure to talk to each other. They don't touch each other. You get to zero collisions in a credible way. And by the way, General Motors says zero emissions, zero collisions. You know, this isn't airy-fairy stuff that some startup that hasn't made a car yet is committed to. It's one of the biggest automakers in the world. If they don't hit each other, and we could rely on that, And if they don't hit people and infrastructure and everything else, a lot of the regulation that we have that is safety related, design of a vehicle, orientation of a vehicle, a lot of the safety features that we have relied upon from analog dynamics, where you distribute the weight, how stiff are the springs, are now electronically guaranteed to miss each other. Well, the design of a car is going to be different. The exterior structures are going to be different. Is there going to be some transportation pod where we face each other? Do we spin as we go down the road? Can I project the image using quantum imaging of what I want that pod to look like? And so how, the future for future automotive designers, for structural engineers, for materials sciences, all of it's going to change. Not because we are switching from fossil fuels to electricity, but because when we go electric, our voltage capacity is going to make everything possible. If I was going to found a auto company today, I would want to be in a place that has equal access to the raw materials to make batteries, or to get my batteries without having to bring them in from a source that I couldn't guarantee volumes from. I'd want a place that knows how to make tools, a place that knows how to construct the actual pod that we sit in. But more importantly, and most importantly here, I want to be in a place that can imagine what we just talked about and then implement it in a way in which they can lead legislative thought, in a way in which we can draw in the best in the world to say, what would you do with 1800 volts? And I mean, I know this sounds trite. I'm sitting here on your stage, but if I just think about it geographically, is there a place that's better positioned than the KW, and a whole bunch of other places between Toronto and Windsor? I mean, we can screw this up, and history has shown that we have, and sometimes that's been me, never Tony, but the conditions are here, and we have the attention of public and private partners to do something right, and the arrow is meant to be a lighthouse there, to say, I'm going to show you, we can do it here. I hope we inspire you, and as much as we inspire capital, as we inspire Jeremy Hedges, the next Jeremy Hedges, to say, okay, I'll give this a shot.
So between, because that's a really compelling vision of what Project Arrow could do to transform the whole sector. And I think between there and where we are now is the electrification. So that EV, when everything's electric, because along the way you're going from, you said 40 volts in a regular car. Mine may have slightly more because it's a hybrid, but when you get the full EV, the possibilities seem, from what you're describing, to be endless. But I guess the question that I would have is, this seems to be happening fast. I think, I don't know, you're the expert, but 3 or 4 years ago, I don't think you had automakers talking about we're going all EV, where, that's a recent thing that business is saying, for whatever reason, whether it's climate change, whether it's environment, whether it's technological, they're saying, well, this is where we're going to be. Is this, Tony, is there a time limit, or in terms of Project Arrow, do we have a window of time where we got to make this? Now you're doing it, Flavio's doing it with Project Arrow, but to get into that EV market is really important now, because that sends the stage of what's next as you get to that fully mature market of EV here in Ontario and South and the region of Waterloo. What's the time zone and what's the urgency for us to do this?
Yeah, so you're asking the sheriff about timing right now. So it's funny, you learn everything after the fact. I didn't realize I was known as the sheriff, but I need
mostly a compliment, Tony. It was mostly.
I know. Yeah. So, there's the time is now. Honestly, we can't let any moss grow under our feet on this one. It's it is, kind of, there's not just a first mover advantage here, but if the IP is going to be valuable and you want to mobilize all of this capacity that we have and mobilize the talent and the brain power and the manufacturing heft, we have to do it now. And when you talk about a window, I remember that first and second automotive symposium we held here, we talked about, 5 to 10 years, right? And look at how industry's led in the last two, right? Just in the last two, and where it's driving. So there's no, you're asking me for a window of time. I respectfully reply, forget the window of time. We've got to start now.
The urgency of now, there's no, let's think about it and get to it in 6 months. I mean, we have to be on this right now. And frankly, industry is leading that, and it will need the support of government to reinforce that adoption. So Flavio, when we look at Project Arrow and the production of EVs, does that change the supply chain? And what are the opportunities for suppliers? I mean, you've identified the ones that are part of Project Arrow as the pilot. There are others that will not be part of that. What's their opportunity to shift, adapt, to become part of what is the potential to be a huge market opportunity, a global market opportunity?
Well, I think the DNA between internal combustion engine cars and zero emission vehicles is 99% the same. But in the transition from ape to human, we know that 1% is what allows you ingress to society. We're all going to be driving around with zero emission vehicles. So that means if you're in the engine business, engine internals, you're doing major castings like pistons and connecting rods and rings, those are going to disappear. But engines are major aluminum castings. You're really in the aluminum casting business. Can you transition to casting motors? If you're in transmission business and you're in the gear business, okay, you're going to go from a 10-speed transmission to a single E-gear. Can you transition? There isn't as much space on this boat as there is on that boat, but they all have doors and windows and mirrors and wheels and seatbelts and stereo systems. I'll use an example, a great company that we spend a lot of time with, Linamar. Linamar is in a lot of the aluminum casting business in their auto business. First of all, they're very well hedged in a whole bunch of different sectors. But in this one here, they're kind of leading the discussion on with partnerships that they have with motors and e-gears, but also partnerships on energy storage. They announced not too long ago a partnership with Ballard. Ballard, I think we're all old enough to remember that when Ballard was going to change the world, and they might just get their day here. A zero emissions vehicle future is what it is. It's not an electric vehicle future. There's a whole bunch of solutions that are going to be part of it. Talk to Toyota about their fuel cells. Well, Linamar listened. And so right from the top, they're making those transitions right now and thinking about 2026 and 2027 as the next program allocation, and then thinking about 2033 and 35 as the next one. We have players in all segments of that here in Canada. Those traditional players have to do that transition work, and the ones that we represent, unless you're making exhaust parts, you've got a path.
Yeah.
If you're making exhaust parts, you're manipulating metals. There may be other things for you to do. Going from 40 volts to 800 volts, I think a whole bunch of companies that you guys represent that you would never consider as automotive suppliers are going to be a major part of the value proposition of the vehicle in the future.
So Tony, what would be, that's a great example. And the Jeremy Hedges example is completely nothing to do with face masks and shields, but was able to pivot to that. What are some of the opportunities here, Tony, in Waterloo region?
Well, I talked about our strength in connected autonomous vehicles, companies like Myovision, Gero, Carnegie, prototyping, analytics, the advanced driver assistance systems, driver health and monitoring, automotive advanced driver assistance systems. I mean, I think Flavio made a really good point. We forget about, like, we can really get drawn into this rabbit hole of kind of EV versus zero emissions. If zero emissions is the standard, I think last year Toyota sold 1 million hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicles, right? 1 million. I mean, that's, when you look at kind of the rest of EV sales, that's fairly significant. So there's a lot that could be done, and then just think about the convergence of data science and robotics and automation, and the companies that are involved, as tier twos and tier threes, and we have our share of tier ones, obviously, in Waterloo region, automotive suppliers. There is very significant capacity here for a pivot, and the goal is, can they be mobilized and transformed as partners in what we characterize as a transformational project that's going to create a new platform? I think the answer is absolutely yes. There's some work to do. Obviously, as a region, I think we need. I know we need 1 or 2 shovel-ready mega sites, if we want to start clean, and that's actually an issue for the province. We almost need like a Project Warp Speed. I mean, I hate quoting the last Trump administration, but we need a Project Warp Speed for EVs, and more importantly, zero-emission vehicles, and Project Arrow. And I think that's what the whole kind of Arrow Mobility Inc. concept can animate itself to become, and then just build on our capacity for research and talent. And if we're serious about inventing the future, Project Arrow is going to be a way for us to prove it.
So, and I think this is an important distinction, because I think, and I'm the first one to admit, I kind of got into electric vehicles is the next piece. But I think what is important to understand is zero emissions is the standard, right? That's the transition that's going to happen, because as you point out, hydrogen is a zero emissions, a climate friendly technology. Go ahead, Tony.
I was just going to say zero emission, zero collision. I think that's, you learn something every day. I can tell, Ian, when you learn something, that you get another cowlick up there, right?
Yeah, so, I know. It's I can still grow hair. So the cowlick is an indicator that I'm getting smarter. It's like a
think about quantum imaging, and so there's a lot, and think about Quantum Valley and Waterloo region, right?
Well, and I think that this is what's important for us to understand, and I think it's where our friends at Communitech and are part of Best Waterloo is the intersection between pure technology and the perimeter that Flavio's talked about. Technology meets hardware meets software, and they all need to be together. And manufacturing, I think this is an important piece, is they need to transition and have more of the technology part and more of the innovative part, because they're going to be doing new things. But as Flavio's pointed out, there's a role for everyone in Project Arrow and in what's next. So let's pivot to, this is not easy. In my mind, what I'm hearing is very encouraging. Is I'm never surprised, but I'm encouraged that the private sector is leading. And Flavio, you brought those big things together. If we wait for government, we'll be waiting too long and miss the opportunity. So we're leading in industry, but it doesn't happen, as the sheriff was the one that said, don't bring me a project that isn't good. There's still a role for government, and whether it's on regulation, whether it's on being an early investor or providing financial aid. What should governments do, Flavio, to make in order to make sure that the shift to EV or zero emission production is successful? I mean, there's got to be a role for them. I think you alluded to that, but maybe because I think we want some takeaways here. What can Tony be doing? What can Greg and I at the chambers be doing? What can the Ontario Chamber of Commerce be doing to make sure we're pushing this and making the change that we need to get to the state that you're evangelizing on, which is where we need to be?
It's a good question. We always say that people vote with their wallets, and the reason that the EV sales in this country are 3% or lower is because they cost more money. Government's always asked us, what can we do? And we always talk about create the conditions manufacture these vehicles at a more efficient price. Well, there's a kind of a chicken and egg. If you don't have that critical mass in the market, you're not going to be able to drive some of the component values down. Governments around the world, maybe in reacting to each other, or reacting to some leaders like in California, and to give kudos where they're due, also in Ottawa, said, well, what if we just say, okay, you got to go 100% zero emissions in a time that is far enough in the future that you're not closing people's doors, but you're forcing them to think differently. They've done that part. The second part the government has to do, and that's at all three levels of government, is to say, okay, let's just imagine today we're able to put an electric vehicle in everybody's driveway. What happens when we plug in? Well, we're going to blow the transformer. We're gonna overheat the transmission stations. Do we have the raw materials required to make the batteries to put them in the vehicles? Do we have the charging infrastructure, and do we have charging partners? What happens to the oil and gas industry that's got to transition out? By the way, the oil and gas industry is incredibly important to the prosperity of Canada. And if we're going to spend money like the $11 billion zero, I can't remember the green fund, the federal government's green fund, some of that comes from tax revenues from out west. How do we help them transition? Could they be partners like, hey, look, if you've got gas stations across this country, I don't know if either one of you have been in real estate development. The last place you want to try to redevelop is something that's been a gas station.
Yeah.
50 or 60 years, those remediation costs are going to be awful. Those are almost valueless pieces of property. Well, is there a role in government to help the fuel retailers in this country turn into chargers? Because we're used to the last 100 years pulling up to the gas station and knowing which one is the one on the way home or on the way out of town. Those could all be charging stations. Government has got to play that role because as you force this change, in other changes like, look, we know we have the lithium in the ground, and we know we have car manufacturers ready to make electric vehicles, but who's going to process that lithium and turn it into cells? Where there are gaps like that, sometimes the public balance sheet is what's required to make it work. And there's a lot of people that say, keep the tax dollars out of it, keep the government out of it. We've got a lot of priorities in this country. All of whom I say, I respect that position. I understand how you put it. But every other major market in the world's governments are, whether that's the Chinese, who have a totally different governance structure, or other free markets like Germany, they're all playing that role. And they'll do it, and their markets will get there, and then their local players will be the ones that profit from it, and we've got to do the same. So, I said to the Prime Minister that somebody has got to be, Mr. or Miss 2035. We're going to get to 100% zero emission vehicle. Who's going to run that file? And around that table, there's going to be people who have nothing to do with automotive around that table to make sure that we get there. When we get there, we all benefit, because I think at the core of it, we all remember we're going here because of a climate crisis. And if we breathe better air and we're all a little bit healthier, and vehicles that don't collide with each other, I want the healthcare sector at that table, amongst other people.
Well, think about it. Insurance sector, things change for a whole bunch of people around it, but changes, as you've described, is never an easy process. But what you've also described is the role of everyone from the federal government right down to the provinces, because they're responsible for energy production and transmission, and local distributors. What do you do to make sure that you've got the infrastructure in place, either at homes or in gas stations? And real estate, I hadn't even thought of that, but gas stations are impossible to redevelop because it is so expensive to remediate the soil from contamination. And whether people think that that's good or bad or indifferent, it's a reality that's going to be in every community across the country as we transition out. Really interesting. So maybe Tony, to you, and then we'll wrap up with your final thoughts from the two of you. What can we do locally here? Your job, Tony Lamothe wakes up in the morning, and while he is waiting for the phone call to come on business to business, but other than that, your day job is to attract investment here to the community, and in particular to that zero emissions EV and auto sector is a big part of it, but manufacturing is advanced manufacturing is a big chunk of it. What can we do locally to attract these types of companies or help the ones that are here to pivot to where they need to be?
I think we got to start with convening a table, much like we did for Best Waterloo, but just convening a table of all the ecosystem stakeholders. So think about, Communitech with its new leadership, Chris Albinson, Jay Krishna at Accelerator Center, the guys at Velocity, the university research folks, Perimeter Institute, the Institute for Quantum Computing. Just get around a table. The great thing about Waterloo Region is it's not 100 people. You can get 12, 15 people around a table or around a Zoom call, God forbid, yet another one. And, just kind of map out what's at stake, map out what we need to do to take advantage of this very powerful, kind of vision of the future, and then build on the capacity and the talent we have. It's consider it like a Project Warp Speed for this endeavor for Waterloo Region. Either we play a leadership role or we amplify and support. But I think there's a lot here for a number of our key companies and key ecosystem players and organizations like mine to be players as opposed to spectators. I like to come back to that. Let's just be a part of this, and if we can think big and turn that into a real mobilization, then like many other things we've done in Waterloo Region, we'll look back on this with a lot of pride. And that's the kind of stuff I like to get involved in.
Well, as God would have it, we are actually having two of the people you just mentioned next. I think it's next week or the week after, but we're having Jay and Chris from Accelerator Center, Chris from Communitech, and we can continue this conversation because amplifying what we've talked about today and sharing it more widely is an important first step. And with that in mind, I'm going off script here. I'm inviting Flavio. Maybe we'll invite Tony too. He gets good ratings when we have him on. But this will be a great conversation to talk on business to business and talk about the importance of our region in that Ontario marketplace, but also the Canadian and global context. So Flavio, I know you're a great interview. So we'd love to have you on the show to amplify that. Tony.
I just want to say one more thing, and let your audience know, and this is important, that there was zero prep for this. As a testimony to the way Flavio and I have kind of kept in touch and worked. Maybe it shows, right? But it's always effortless. And as much as kind of the sheriff enjoyed working with Flavio, to transform the province, Flavio, there's nothing I liked more than having a veal sandwich with you at Bitondo's back in the day. That was the best.
Okay, well, that's your final comment. Relationships matter, and that's what we know here in Waterloo Region and beyond. Tony, your connections, especially with Queen's Park, really important. Flavio, you've got national and international as well as Queen's Park. What any final thoughts on of Project Arrow and where we go from here?
Yeah, speaking of those veal sandwiches, we got to get. I have to be shown the best Italian pizza joints or veal sandwich places in the KW so that we can
do that.
Some of those. We can convene some of those meetings there because, when I said I got this question on what should the region do in Quebec, and I said, well, why couldn't you be the battery capital of the world? And I mean, I know that sounds easy, even though it's very complicated. It is actually rather easy. Just decide you're going to do it. You have the ingredients and do it. Feel like the Waterloo region could be the zero collision center of North America. It's facilitating zero collisions, and then the second piece of it is, okay, well, we've got zero collisions. Now, what do we engineer in the transportation space that's facilitated by the fact that there's no chance that you're going to hit each other? So let's dream a little bit bigger. I really, really think that where you guys are sitting, which isn't that far out my window here, has the potential to be the automotive capital of the next Canadian century, because it is so close to the other two capitals who would get offended when I say this. When you're looking at the planet, how far is Windsor from the KW, and how far is Toronto? This region, we should be talking to each other 20 years from now and saying, wow, I can't believe what happened. In a positive sense.
All right, we're gonna book that meeting offline, but we're gonna schedule it for 20 years down. Hopefully, we're all still around. Hopefully, I'm still around. But we'll leave it there. Thank you so much to both Tony and Flavio for joining us today. That does bring us to the end of today's session. Thank you again to our title sponsor of the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor of the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and November sponsor, our friends at Waterloo EDC. And finally, to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, we do host a new Business Success Series session every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Join us next week for New Leaders, Revitalizing Waterloo's Tech Community. We'll welcome back Tony Lamantia to join our new leaders. Chris Albinson is the new CEO of Communitech, and Jay Krishnan is the new CEO at the Accelerator Center to discuss Waterloo's tech community, what their new strategic directives are, and where they see areas for improvement. We hope to see you then. For full details and to register, please visit greaterkwchamber.com. Please do share this series with your friends and colleagues and join us every Wednesday afternoon for another edition of the Greater KW Chambers Business Success Series, because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.